investigating and then charging actual criminals with committing crimes, and not just trying to take things away from people without going through a criminal investigation.
So the one thing that most parents don't ever want to hear is to find out their child's been arrested. Take us through what exactly happens if a child gets, or I guess over 18, well, they're not that's still a minor, is it? 21 is now?
No. A minor is still young,
under
17 or younger.
Oh, it's 17. So let's even say they're 18, 17, 18, it'll make it 18 because they're not a minor. They've gotten themselves arrested because they've done something, or they've hauled them off to jail. What is the next step? What are they allowed to? You see in the old movies, they give them the phone to call, but that doesn't happen anymore. You can't. They don't just call somebody. You get that recording. Walk us through what happens when somebody's in jail and how they get in touch with their parents or an attorney. How that system has worked out.
Sure. So people who are arrested here in Brevard County would be taken to the Brevard County Jail in Sharps, and they would be booked into basically a cell full of recent arrestees, and within 24 hours they're supposed to be given an arraignment. Now, some people are able to bond out before the arraignment. And, that's the big question is, do you have money to bond out with? If you don't, then you wait till the arraignment, and the judge may release you on your own recognizance if you're a first-time defendant and the charge isn't very serious. And the bond hearings are the legal standard in a bond hearing is, are you likely to come to court? Are you a danger to the community? So typically if people don't have a history of missing court and they don't seem like they're going to run away, typically they'll either be released on their own recognizance or given a low enough bond where they can pay it, or get a friend or family member to be able to pay it.
So on that bond, when they say your bond is set at $2,000, technically they only come up with, is it 10% of that?
Well, it depends on the type of bond, but most bonds will allow you to pay 10%, but you would owe the full thing, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sometimes you're expected to sort of put a car or some property against that, and that's why you're allowed to pay the 10%.
Well, I know I had a neighbor, it was funny because I had just heard the scam that was on the website and on TV. This was a couple of years ago, where they said, be careful if you get a recording or someone calling you and saying, we've got, your grandson, your granddaughter is being held. You've got to give us money right now to get him out of jail. And people fall for that because they might just happen to hit it lucky that person does have a grandchild, and the scam artist, collects a credit card or has them pay in prepaid credit cards or whatever. And I had just told my neighbor that scam was out, and she came over and she said, I just got the phone call that
wow.
Somebody,
she
said this, but the weird thing was she said, I got this recording that said, this is the Brevard County Sheriff's Department, and we're holding one of your relatives, and I don't even know if they said Brevard County, but they made it sound like it was a jail, and they said, you have to go to the site and put money into the site so they could make the phone call back to you. So I said, oh, that's a scam. So she didn't do it. And come to find out, her grandson had been arrested, and that was the only way they can communicate. They call you and tell you to put money into a prepaid phone, or I guess they call it their allowance or something.
Right. People do have accounts, and it's a huge, huge business all across the United States of forcing people who are in jail, typically on very low-level crimes, but the phone service for them to communicate with anyone is insanely expensive, right. and these jail services companies are making a killing. And, of course, it's not even the defendants who end up paying this. It's all the friends and family trying to sort it out and see even if they're going to help, they might not even necessarily immediately know what the person's charged with.
Exactly.
I will say this, if you get a call and you're not sure, you can go to Sharps and, talk to the front desk and find out, if the person's held. There's also through the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, there's a way to look up whether people are in jail. So you can verify it before making any payment, either online through the Brevard County Sheriff's site or by going in person to the Brevard County Jail Complex.
Yes. So it was very strange. Well, anyway, the end of that story was we decided it was a scam. And about 3 hours later, this mysterious woman calls her who says, your grandson is in jail with my son. And he wanted you to know that he was there. So I told him I would call you, So it was we went, oh, okay, I'm warning him about a scam. And it turned out to be that's the new procedure. So the old movies and the things that we see where it says you have the right to a free phone call and they push the phone to you, you're not going to get that phone call. You have to have a loved one put money in for them to communicate with you. And I think the minimum was something like $5 that you had to put into this account, which right off the bat sounds like a scam. So there's so many things out there anymore that we're afraid to do anything because we think in terms of all these people calling and they're and then they've got phone numbers that look like something that's local. So beware. That's what we're saying right now is just beware of what's going out there. We've got about 8 minutes left, and I do want to talk about bankruptcy. Unfortunately, that is going to be the way for some people right now. We've tried to figure out ways to keep them from bankruptcy. As I said, Jonathan Lack always speaks on the Hardest Hit program that you might want to check into at first to find out, can I keep making my payments while I'm looking for a job? But it gets to that point where you just are overwhelmed and there's no place to go but wiping the slate clean. Tell us a little bit about the different kinds of bankruptcies. And I know it's always on a case by case, but there are different kinds of bankruptcies available for our listeners.
Right. So there's for consumers, there's two main types of bankruptcy. The most common is the Chapter 7, and that's typically used by people who make less than the median income for their household size, their family size. And the other one is called the Chapter 13, which is sometimes used by people who are over median income. And in that type of case, they're expected to pay some or all of their debts back, typically across a 5-year plan. Now, every now and then you'll see a under median Chapter 13, which can last only 3 years. That's not, those.
Is that median income for the whole county, or is it for the state, or is it by municipality?
Well, it's determined. It's done by state, and then within the state, looking at the zip code.
So they look at how many people are living in the family as far as median income and so forth.
Right. So, for example, for a household of 4, it's approximately $65,000. For a household of 1, it's approximately $40,000.
Mm-hmm. So if you're a single person and you're making $40,000 or less, you would then qualify probably for the Chapter 7, which totally wipes out everything and you're starting fresh.
Right. A Chapter 7 would just completely, a successful Chapter 7 would just completely wipe away any credit card, any medical, random, bills, old, broken apartment lease, broken cell phone contract, auto lease, repossessed car. If a creditor has sued you and gotten a judgment, you can wipe that out. You couldn't wipe away a judgment for fraud, and you can't wipe away student loans, child support, back taxes, or criminal restitution. On back taxes, there is an asterisk there. There are circumstances where you can include tax debts, but on student loans, there's just nothing.
I know that student loans, I listen to Dave Ramsey a lot, and that's the big bugaboo right now, is people have thousands and thousands, up to the $100,000 in student loan debt. And here they've gotten some master's degree in psychology or whatever they've gotten, and they're working in at some place for minimum wage because they can't find something in their now expertise area of expertise. So those student loans are not used in the bankruptcies. Is there any? And what
many millennials, of course, who have the most student loan debt of anyone, what many millennials are not aware of is that student loans were dischargeable in bankruptcy
Maybe when they got them originally.
Up through the 80s. So when people like Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or most of the U.S. Senate were in college, if they'd had a recession hit right after they graduated or something like that, they could have filed a bankruptcy and wiped out any student loans. And of course, back in those days, colleges were cheap, and they were cheap precisely because people couldn't borrow a lot of money, and it had to be something a young person could actually pay, or it wouldn't work. Now with student loans, people have the access to the capital, so what happens? The prices have gone way up. It's a bubble.
It's crazy. I know there was a seminar I went to just recently about how to send your children to college without a student loan, and it all based on maybe getting a second mortgage or something where it's on your mortgage as opposed to getting these student loans, because they get to be a little expensive and they don't always negotiate with you and you can't buy them down and so forth. So one of the things that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, we're here in Florida, which is a homestead exemption, which applies to bankruptcy in some ways because you can separate your home from your bankruptcy. Let's talk a little bit about that, where if you need to go bankrupt because you have too much debt, but you want to save your home, how that affects the bankruptcy.
Right. So, classic situation is, let's say I have a family of 4 and they're both working and the kids are doing okay and they've got the house and they're paying on 2 cars, and then one of them maybe loses a job or maybe just has a decrease in hours or a cut in pay. They might still be working, they're just not making the money that they quite need to pay everything. So what happens is they're doing their best, but they start falling behind on the credit cards and this and that. But, if they're smart, hopefully, and people make mistakes, and I'm not saying not smart, but if they know what they're doing, they're going to stay current on their house, they're going to stay current on their car, and they let the unsecured debt fall by the wayside, because that's what we can put into the bankruptcy, is the credit card debt, is the medical debt. The house, if you're behind, bankruptcy typically is not going to save it, unless you can get current on it again. And it's very hard to catch up on a home once you're behind.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you're current and just making payments and going along, then in the bankruptcy, you can re-promise to pay on that home and continue making the payments, and you'll come out of the bankruptcy not owing the credit cards, not owing the medical, but still owing on your house, current on your house, and with the ability to continue making the payments and eventually pay it off and own your own home.
Right. And there's so many different avenues. Some people decide, I know they call real estate agents and they'll say, I can't afford my home anymore because I'm out of work. And so we look at that situation first before we list their home, because there are ways to do that with the Florida's Hardest Hit program. There's also something that Jonathan Lack handles, which is called the Principal Reduction Program, where if you're $50,000 upside down on your house, they give you that money to get you down to where you're even with what your home is appraised at. So there's some situations there if people feel bad, gosh, I'm throwing $1,500, $2,000 at my mortgage payment every month, and I'm still owe $50,000 more than my house is worth. So there's all kinds of things that, again, we always harp on this. We always want to stress this. So you want to talk to some professionals before you make any kind of rash decisions, because there might be a couple avenues that you might be able to do first, or position yourself in the best situation. Again, on the house, you can separate that, but they do have some restrictions, and we only have about a minute to go. They do have some restrictions on how much your car is worth and things like that they have to take into consideration when you go bankrupt. Do you know approximately how long it would take to, as far as the creditors are concerned, to be able to buy another home or to build on your credit again after a bankruptcy?
It's a very common question. I mean, at the end of the day, there's so many pieces and parts, moving parts to buying a home. But, the short answer is I've met people who've bought within 3 years of having a bankruptcy. Now, that does depend on what's their down payment, what's their income, what's the value of the home they're trying to buy. So there's a lot of factors. But I've met several people. I mean, more than a handful who've bought within 3 years.
Well, they need to call you, Eric Morgan, at 321-253-6223. I spoke with Carolyn Wolf about this, and she said, yes, you can still get a mortgage several years after bankruptcy. And again, it depends on what you said, down payment, and whether the home was included in the bankruptcy. We really appreciate. Give out your website one more time, Eric.
It's spacecoastbankruptcy.com for bankruptcy filers.